All right. Surprise from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court voted 5-4 to block a Louisiana law that would enforce new regulations on abortion clinics. The state of Louisiana, run by these Christian fascists, lying, hypocritical sons of bitches, had passed a very, very restrictive law in Louisiana, and it was challenged, and it worked its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. Well, surprise, surprise, Chief Justice John Roberts joined with the Supreme Court's 4 liberals last night to block this Louisiana law that opponents of the law say would close most of the state's abortion clinics and leave it with only one doctor eligible to perform the procedure. And I think in any given year in Louisiana, there are several thousand abortions that are conducted. Now, the justices may yet consider whether the law that was passed in 2014, and that law requires doctors at abortion clinics to have admitting privileges to nearby hospitals, whether or not that law unduly burdens women's access to abortion. The Louisiana law has never been enforced, and the Supreme Court in 2016 found a nearly identical Texas law to be unconstitutional. Nancy Northrup, who's the president and CEO of the Center for Reproductive Rights, which represented the law's challengers, said, quote, "The Supreme Court has stepped in under the wire to protect the rights of women in Louisiana." She added, "The 3 clinics left in Louisiana can stay open while we ask the Supreme Court to hear our case. This should be an easy case. All that's needed is a straightforward application of the court's own precedent, the one set in overturning the Texas law." Now, the court's foremost conservative members would have allowed the law to take effect. Oh, surprise, surprise. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, the once and future rapist, or almost rapist, if there is such a thing, said there was a dispute about whether the doctors could obtain admitting privileges and that a 45-day grace period would have given time to settle that question. Kavanaugh wrote, quote, "The parties have offered, in essence, competing predictions," end quote, about whether several doctors can obtain privileges. That's what Kavanaugh wrote in his dissenting opinion. He went on to say, if we denied the stay, in other words, made it possible for this law to go into effect, that question could be readily and quickly answered without disturbing the status quo or causing harm to the parties or the affected women, and without the court's further involvement, end quote. Bullshit. Now, the other ones, Justice Uncle Clarence Thomas and Sammy the Fish Alito and Neil Gorsuch, the illegal Supreme Court justice. Remember, he was the one that was appointed after Trump first took office, after holding the seat open for a year. They weren't even going to hear from the nominee that Obama put out there. So Gorsuch is the one who doesn't have any fucking right to be on the Supreme Court. Anyway, Alito, Uncle Clarence, and Neil Gorsuch would have allowed the law to go into effect, but they didn't join Kavanaugh's dissent. Now, that can mean one of several things. I think what it means is they themselves read Kavanaugh's dissent, and even though they're right-wing nutcases, they read Kavanaugh's dissent and said, what the fuck's he talking about? So they dissented on their own. The abortion providers in their briefs had said just the prospect of the law would go into effect was already affecting the availability of qualified and safe and medical abortions in the state of Louisiana. Their brief, the ones who are in favor of, why don't you fucking stop this? This involves women. Their brief said, quote, scheduled medical procedures are being canceled, physicians and clinic staff are preparing to be out of work, and patients seeking to exercise their constitutional right to abortion are being turned away or sent to other states, end quote. Now, the majority on the Supreme Court, the 5 justices who voted to what specifically did they vote to do? Damn it. To block the law from going into effect and let another hearing develop, possibly. But the majority who voted that way on the Supreme Court, and this is customary, they didn't give a reason for granting the stay, for preventing the law from going into effect. But according to the Post, it seems likely the full court will now grant the case a full briefing and review and perhaps re-examine its earlier decision, which was made by a very different Supreme Court. In the court's 2016 decision, it said the admitting privileges requirement, quote, provides few, if any, health benefits for women. It wasn't intended to, poses a substantial obstacle to women seeking abortions, which is what it was, that was its intent, and constitutes an undue burden on their constitutional right to do so. But that's, you know, when you set aside the legalese, when you set aside the terminology and the formal statements and all this other stuff, look, peel it back, and here's what you're left with. The white, male, fascist Christians, in this case, in Louisiana, want to tell women, you go have sex and you get pregnant, you're going to have that baby. You do not have the right to control your own body because you bitches fucked everything up when Eve disobeyed God. So this is your punishment. It says so in Genesis. This is your punishment. Whew. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. You have your choice. You can listen to The Ranting with the audio podcast or listen and watch me lose control with a video podcast subscription. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.